Couples were exchanging rings in ancient Egypt over 3,000 years ago, and today couples are exchanging rings in wedding ceremonies all over the world. It's a thing, but there are so many questions around the exchanging of the rings in the wedding ceremony. Who brings the ring in? Once the ring comes in, what happens to the person who keeps the ring? Is there somebody who holds the rings during the ceremony? What does that person do when it's time to exchange the ring and give it to the bride or groom? How does the bride or groom put the ring on the other person's hand? Do they say something? Do they repeat? What's the best? I'm Mark Allen Grollo. I'm a book-solid, full-time professional wedding officiant. There are a lot of moving parts around the exchanging of the rings, and if we overlook any of those parts, it can lead to everything from the person who's supposed to have the rings not having them, to the bride or the groom stumbling all over their words when we're asking them to repeat after us in the ceremony itself. And so, without further ado, here are 8 tips for exchanging the rings really well to prevent any of those mishaps from happening. Let's get right to it. Number 1 is decide who will be holding the rings in the ceremony. Now, as the wedding officiant, the person in charge of putting together the whole ceremony, we need to talk with our couple about many of the decisions around what's going to happen in the ceremony. I like to have a ceremony planning workshop about 4 to 6 weeks before the day. In that wedding planning ceremony session called the wedding workshop, I ask my couple, one of the many questions is, who will be holding the ring in the wedding ceremony? Now, sometimes it's important to remember the person who's going to bring the rings in and the person who's going to keep the rings during the ceremony, that's not the same person. A lot of couples will opt for a ring bearer to come in, usually a young boy, to walk down the aisle with the rings in a box or on the pillow and hand them to somebody, and that person will hold the rings during the ceremony. Traditionally, that is the best man, so the ring bearer will walk in down the aisle, open the box, go up to the best man, open the box. The best man will remove the rings, put them in his pocket. Now, some couples opt to have the best man hold one and the maid of honor hold another, if that's what's happening in this ceremony. I've seen it all. Sometimes the ring bearer goes to grandpa in the front row and he holds on to them and brings them up in the ceremony when it's time. Sometimes it's a dog who walks down the aisle with the rings attached to a collar. Yes, I've seen that. I've even heard one of my coaching clients talk about a horse that brought in the rings. So somebody's going to bring the rings into the ceremony space, and somebody else perhaps is going to hold on to the rings during the ceremony. It's important to find out in the weeks leading up to the wedding itself who will be holding the rings in the ceremony. So when it's time to do the exchange, you can call on that person or animal. That brings us to the second thing to consider. Now it is time to choose where to put the ring exchange in your ceremony script. Now, in my opinion, the ring exchange almost always goes best after the wedding vows. I like to do the vows, then I like to put on the rings as a physical, concrete symbol, kind of nailing in the promises that the couple made earlier with their words. Now it becomes concrete in the form of a ring. Now, that is not to say you can't put anything between the vows and the exchange of the rings. A lot of the time, if there's some sort of wedding ritual, I like to do that right after the vows. So whether it's jumping over a broom, whether it's a unity candle lighting, maybe it's a sand mixing, a whiskey mixing, lighting something on fire, smoke, all the things. I know sometimes all the elements, they sound like a magic show when you say them all together. But coming out of the vows, you might want to do a ritual of some sort right there, let's say a sand mixing, and then move into the rings. Now, again, the one thing to consider is a hand fasting ceremony. That one involves the hands, and of course the rings involve hands as well. So if you're going to do a hand fasting ceremony, that's the one case where you might want to do rings before the hand fasting, because of course you're going to tie up their hands, and that's a logistical problem when it's time to put rings on. So in that case, I often do vows, then rings, then a hand fasting after the rings are on. But usually you're going to want to put a ritual between the two. So, in a nutshell, almost always wedding vows, then wedding rings, then getting ready to pronounce the couple as married. Okay, that brings us to consideration number 3, which is check that the ring keeper does have the rings before starting the ceremony. So we've decided with our couple who is going to have the rings in the ceremony. We've decided where in our wedding script the ring exchange goes best. Now we can skip right to the wedding day. Now, about 5 minutes before the ceremony, when everyone is lined up at the back, everyone who's going to come into the ceremony down the aisle at a certain point, of course, the couple, their parents, perhaps step parents, their bridesmaids, their groomsmen, the ring bearers, the junior bridesmaids, flower girls, animals, whatever it is, everyone and everything that's going to come down the aisle, everyone's lined up. We're just a couple of minutes before start time, and as I discuss in my video, 5 last things to check. Right before we kick off, I always make a point of finding the person who is supposed to have the rings. As we said, maybe it's a ring bearer, maybe it's the best man, but find that person, go up to them and ask them directly, do you have the rings? You would be surprised how often the answer is, oh my goodness, no. And then, of course, they have to get the rings and retrieve them. That's happened actually so often that I generally ask that person half an hour before the ceremony when I show up early. So you might want to get into that practice just to make sure they're not in the hotel room or back in the car, and you don't want to find that out 2 minutes before ceremony start time. But at the very least, do it again just as a last double check to make sure before we go out there, say to the person who's supposed to have the rings, do you have the rings? When the answer is yes, then you are ready to kick off that wedding ceremony. Which leads us to point number 4, which is introduce the ring exchange section of the wedding ceremony with a reflection. So when you move into the ring exchange part of the wedding ceremony, you want to explicitly state, almost give a marker for everyone listening, that we are moving from one part of the ceremony into this next part. They don't have the advantage of reading the way you might read a blog or an article where our eye page breaks, paragraph breaks, that helps us. So it's good to say in a wedding ceremony when you're moving from one part into another, what's happening next. So I will say something very explicit like Morgan and Julian will now exchange rings as a symbol of the promises they've made here today and of their ongoing commitment to each other. Now that's what I say. This is where I recommend signal that we're entering the ring exchange time, and then also now it's time for you to go into some sort of reflection. It can be as long or as short as you want about why we exchange wedding rings and what makes this so significant and important to this day and to the couple. So do you want to talk about how the ring is round and it goes round and round, it'll never end, just like the love of this couple? Do that. You'll hear that in a lot of ceremonies. Do you want to talk about how the rings are made of precious metal and forged in fire, and that's like life and commitment and all the things that are going to happen, forge this bond that will never be broken between this couple? Do that too. So just think of a reflection, maybe scour the religious tradition of the couple or your tradition, if it's the same as the couple, to think about something that might go well in this section, or just reflect on the ring itself and come up with something entirely new, but you're going to want to say something about the rings here. We're going into the rings, you tell everyone, then make a little reflection about why we do it. We won't want everyone to sit there and go like, what's the point of this? Just walk them through why it's significant. And then we go into the logistical part of actually exchanging the wedding rings. Now, as for me, I keep it short and simple. The focus of my ceremonies is telling the couple's story. And so I just focus on their story and the commitment, basically how they got together. I have a formula about telling the couple's story. And then I say, when we get to this part, again, like I said earlier, Morgan and Julian will now exchange rings as a symbol of the promises they've made here today, because remember, we just did the vows, and of their ongoing lifelong commitment to each other. And then it's time for the keeper of the rings to bring the rings forward, and now it gets a little bit logistical, so we got to talk this through, which brings us to number 5, which is make sure, the ring keeper knows the cue for when to come forward with the rings. Now, traditionally, when it's time for the groom to put the ring on the bride's finger, say, this is where the wedding officiant, again, has traditionally said, who has the rings? This is part of a rich tradition where the officiant asks questions in the wedding ceremony that make it seem like he doesn't know where he is or what he's doing. Like when, the father gets to the end of the aisle with the bride and the officiant says, who gives this woman to be married to this man today? Doesn't use any names, doesn't seem to really know who the person is standing before him, that kind of thing. So weddings are a lot more personal now. We can get away from acting like we don't. We do so many weddings every day because this is our parish. We don't even know what's going on. Now we can use first names. We can address people like we know what's going on because we've had meetings with them. Presumably they know us and we know why they're here today. So as I was saying earlier, for newer officiants, I advise that we be as explicit as possible in a wedding ceremony. There are a lot of moving parts and it just helps. So for example, like we said, when it's time to exchange rings, you tell everyone what's going on. They will now exchange rings. When it's time to say vows, you would say to your couple, Julian, I'm going to ask you a question and you can please reply with I do, or you can say, please repeat after me. The same goes here. You're going to want to say to whoever has the keeper of the rings, use the person's name. So you can say, Chris, would you please now come forward and give Morgan's ring to Julian? Now for me, because I have a rehearsal for every single wedding I do, I basically insist on it. I don't use an explicit prompt like that. Basically in the rehearsal, that's where, I'm pretty excruciating about practicing the rings for the rehearsal, as we'll discuss in the next few moments. But I give, say, the best man, if the best man is the one with the rings, in the rehearsal I will say, here's what I'm going to say, and this is where you spring into action. I'll give you a nod, but I'm going to say, Morgan and Julian will now exchange rings as a symbol of the promises they've made here today and of their ongoing commitment to each other, and I'm going to turn to you and I'm going to nod. At that point, that's when you come forward. Okay, so whether you explicitly give the prompt or whether you practice it in the rehearsal, either way, we're achieving that goal of saying to the keeper of the rings, here is your cue, and when this happens, it's time to come forward with the rings. Which leads us to point number 6, which is the ring keeper gives the ring to the groom or to partner 1. Now, I say partner 1 because I try not to be heteronormative. If it's a same-sex wedding, then it doesn't really groom to groom, bride to bride. But this is the part where the person who keeps the rings gives the ring to the person who is about to take their turn putting the ring on their fiance's finger. Now, this seems pretty self-explanatory and straightforward. It's surprisingly not. There are 3 tips, 3 hacks I want to give you to help you go smoothly here and avoid any disasters. First, I tell the ring keeper not to keep the rings in a box. This seems counterintuitive, right? Because aren't the rings really safe in a box, nestled inside your coat, nice and cozy until they're ready? No, absolutely not. I have had several mishaps with best men who have not listened to me and have had the rings in a box. So the most notable was an outdoor wedding on a deck. The poor best man stepped forward just like we practiced. In the rehearsal, of course, he didn't have the box, and I advised him not to have a box. But he steps forward with the box, pops it open, and of course, because the rings shifted when he was walking and when he pulled it out of his pocket, they weren't nestled in their nice tight little slots. He opened the box, they popped out like jacks in the box, actually hit the deck and started rolling. There were big cracks in the wood, and we all just kind of stood frozen helplessly, watching the rings roll towards a crack and mercifully just kind of go wing, 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 and not actually roll between the cracks. And it was just, made it a moment of levity, like I've talked about in other videos. Be ready to make a joke. I said something like, great, just like we practiced, and everybody laughed, so it was great. But my goodness, what if the rings had fallen through the cracks there? So, because rings bounce and shift in a box, you don't actually know how they're placed when you crack that thing open. I always say to the best man, if he's carrying the rings, or whoever has the rings, don't put them in anything. Have them in your pocket, reach into your pocket, pull them out, so that you're handling them directly and there's no unpleasant surprises. Now, the second thing is a bit of stagecraft. A lot of the time, the groomsmen and the bridesmaids will be lined up kind of more behind the couple because the couple's kind of popped out towards the guest in the seat. And so it is kind of instinct for the best man, if he has the rings, to just kind of take one little step towards the groom, and the groom will turn like this or like this to get the rings. What happened there is when the groom turns, see what I've done there is I've turned my back to you. Now, if you're the wedding guests, you just see the back of the groom. If you're the photographer, you just see the back of the groom as well. So, like I say, a bit of stagecraft here. I always tell the best man, go the long way. Take a couple of steps to the other side of the groom so that the groom has to open his body up and turn forward instead of back. That way, all the guests can see what's going on. The photographer can get a great shot and everything is unimpeded. Lastly, I tell the brides and grooms in the rehearsal, I say, how do you accept the ring? And groomsman, if he is the ring keeper, how do you put the ring in the groom's hand? And I always tell them, none of this pincer to pincer. We're so bad at this. I say, let's practice this. Put your hand out flat, your palm, and the best man, whoever has the rings, is going to place the ring flat in the palm, and you close your hand around it. Let's not have rings falling, not on our watch, and that is just a really simple logistical thing. Let me demonstrate that again. Palm up, bride or groom. Ring keeper puts it in the palm, boom. It's a fail-safe method. None of this pincer-to-pincer thing. We haven't evolved well enough to do that yet in a wedding ceremony for whatever reason. Well, now with the rings passed safely off, it is time to move to the next part, which is, and this is for you wedding officiants, wait. Number 7, wait while partner 1 places the ring on partner 2's finger. Wait. I contemplated calling this next point, avoid this major rookie mistake, but in fact, I've seen some experienced professionals do this as well. Basically, what we don't want to do here is ruin the moment by making the brides and grooms do 2 things at once, which essentially, in this example is, don't make them try to put the ring on the finger and repeat or say any words at the same time. It'll ruin the moment, and here's how and here's why. In the wedding ring exchange, essentially 2 things are happening. They're putting the ring on the finger, as I just said, and they're saying words. Well, when we collapse these 2 things, we ruin the moment. Let me give you an example. So here's one scenario. The groom takes the ring, starts putting it on the bride's finger, but it sticks. It doesn't go on easily. This happens almost all the time, by the way. Trying to get the ring on, it's not going on over the knuckle. They giggle a little bit. There's some blushing, some embarrassment. And then the officiant pulls out their verbal 6-shooter and starts saying to the groom, okay, now please repeat after me. Sandra, I give you this ring. And then, so he's still trying to put the ring on. It's not going on. They're focused on this. Am I ever going to get the ring on? And then the officiant starts saying words at the groom. And the poor guy is trying to do 2 things at once. Usually it leads to him going, can you please repeat that? I'm sorry, I was trying to... And it just kind of ruins the moment. Now let me walk you through scenario number 2. Groom is putting the ring on bride's finger and it's not going on, it's sticking, it's not going over the knuckle, all that good stuff. Officiant just waits and smiles, and the groom is sweating a little bit. He'll make a little comment like, whew, this is tough work. The bride will make a little crack like, sometime today, are you gonna be able to do this? People are giggling, they're laughing, the guests are laughing a little bit, and the officiant, you can just join into that moment. Don't be afraid of the silence, don't be afraid of what's gonna happen. It's a little bit awkward, but it's also funny. Give it some air, let it breathe. He will get the ring on eventually. I've never had to call for dish soap yet. So the ring goes on, everybody giggles and then kind of recomposes themselves, and then the officiant says, and now, Morgan, please repeat after me. And he starts the repeating part, and that part is moving and beautiful. So see what happened there? When you make them put the ring on and talk at the same time, you're actually ruining both moments. You're ruining how funny the awkward thing can be, and you're ruining how moving and beautiful the repeating of the commitment words can be. Whereas if you give it space and let it breathe, the funny, awkward part is quite humorous and memorable. And then the repeating of the words is actually quite moving and beautiful, and you're accomplishing both wonderful things. So if you're doing a wedding rehearsal, which is what I always recommend, and I have a video on that, how to run a fun and successful wedding rehearsal. In the wedding rehearsal, I always tell the couple, I'm not going to make you walk and chew gum at the same time, so to speak. I'm not going to make you put the ring on and talk at the same time. They're each going to take their turns. Groom puts the ring on, you wait, then ask the groom to repeat a few words, and then repeat the process. The best man, ring keeper, gives the ring to the bride. Bride puts the ring on the finger, and then she repeats the words. Do those things very separately and distinctly, and this part will always be a smash success. So basically, we've already covered this, but it has to be said, the final distinct part of the ring exchange is point number 8. Prompt partner 1 to consummate his or her ring exchange with a few words. So when the ring is on, we want to help partner 1 seal the deal with saying a few words. Sometimes that's repeat after me. And so I recommend getting them to, they've already said their vows, but here, like I say, this is kind of nailing it home, a concrete physical symbol of those promises. And so this is the part afterwards. When the ring is on, you just say very explicitly, Morgan, please repeat after me. Now, here, if you're part of a religious tradition, certain places, certain faiths, something very specific and traditional is said here, make sure you ask the couple. Typically, when I share the script with them, my couples are usually secular, so I just have a wonderful little kind of consummation here about why they're giving the rings to each other and what it means. And I'll actually, this is exactly what I tell them. Most couples love it, and you can use it for yourself. I say, please repeat after me, and then he'll start. He'll say, Morgan, I give you this ring as a reminder that I will love and honor you. Please wear it as a daily sign of my commitment to you. That's it. That's what I asked the couple to say. It's not too long. It's not too short. It drives the point home. You can get that scripting at the blog post that I wrote about this on howtoofficiateawedding.ca. The link will be in the description below. Some couples, they do not want to repeat. They're just too nervous. They want to say almost nothing in the ceremony. In that case, you can rephrase that to a question. Again, you'll find that as well in the same blog post, and that's yours to keep. When you ask the question, you just ask it in the form of do you, and then they answer, I do. Remember the steps, walk them out in a wedding rehearsal with your couple and all their friends and family, and there you go, bingo, you'll have a wedding ring exchange that even an ancient Egyptian would absolutely love. Like I said, don't forget to grab the scripting for this in the companion blog post. You'll find it in the description below. If you haven't grabbed my guide yet, my 10-part wedding ceremony guide, how to put a ceremony together, please grab that, howtoofficiateawedding.ca/guide. If you liked this video, if it was helpful, like the video, leave me a comment below. I always read and reply to any comments you leave me. I love hearing from you. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any videos that I'm putting out all the time about how to officiate a wedding. See you in the next one.